Hello, welcome back, everyone. Thanks, Karen, for the link to the meeting notes in the chat. On that note, if you have stuff that you want to add for the agenda today, go to the doc and add them. So as usual, we can start with an update. Maybe more people will show up as we continue the discussion. We start with Igor. Any updates you want to share for today? And I have a more specific question on the results viewer, if you have any updates from them.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Adrian. I don't have any updates, but thank you for approving the pull request. I will merge it. Also, I saw your message to Dan, but he didn't say anything to me. So I'm not sure about the timeline still.
Okay. Well, maybe you can ping him internally or something. I can add more to that email, but there's not much more I can do.
Right, I understand.
The reason why I'm pressing a bit with this right now is I have some people internally here that want to publish similar things in terms of visualization for OCP output. Mm-hmm. And I told them to wait until we get a view of this tool, because I think this would kind of supersede their work. So, and I don't want to waste people man hours or whatever you want to call it. So that's why I'm asking.
If Google does not release it, basically it will be replaced by another tool because there is no other choice. Is this correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other people will start work on these things.
Right.
But this is like a smaller thing than currently, at least, than what I have from Dan as a description for that result viewer thing. So I'm thinking yours is more complete in that sense.
All right, I'll talk to him.
Go ahead, Karen.
So this tool as of now is not supporting OCP yet. That's something which support needs to be added. This is actually being done by someone in Taiwan. I have not seen an update. I know Dan checked with him, but I do not know what's the update. But hopefully the next week I will be able to tell you that.
So if I understand correctly, Karen, it is currently using the Melton protobuf, right? So that is kind of the version 1 of the spec. So I'm assuming you need some.
Sorry, it's not the protobuf. It actually relies on the JSON as the input. So you feed in the JSON.
Okay, I'm what I'm referring by that is it has the JSON schema that was related to the protobuf from a while ago.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, if I can help with anything on that account, just let me know.
Yeah, I will sync up with the Taiwan team and I will have an update next week.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. Go ahead, Igor.
Yeah, so regarding the tool's support for version 2, I'm pretty sure I saw a tool. It was made as an app engine tool, if I'm not mistaken, that supported OCP. So maybe I'm making this up, but I think I saw something like that. So it should support OCP. Yeah, we will figure it out, Kiran and I.
All right. Thanks. Thanks both of you. Next up, Giovanni, since you're on the call, you want to share any update on the work you're doing?
Yeah. So the creator for the OCP TV is moving forward. I would like to have a presentation about that in 2 weeks' time, more or less, so that the people could give feedback to us. And then on the other side, I had a look at the Microsoft Virtual Client specification, and it's pretty much nice. So essentially, I think it will cover pretty much everything that we need with some abstraction because some parameters, if I remember, were really specific to the Azure stuff. But in any case, if the people here are interested, I could try to create a draft from that and then starting to get feedback. And yeah, let's try. I think it's a good project to work on because it could improve a lot the way we are running the dialogues. So yes, I will start to work on that, especially because I need that internally. And yes, then I will try to propose that one also to the people here, and let's see which is the feedback.
Cool. Thanks, Giovanni. So to clarify a bit, this spec draft that you're talking about, this is we should find a name for this because I keep calling it in different ways. This is the aggregation spec, right? So how you put in multiple
let's call
diags and
aggregation.
pieces.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be nice. And since you've confirmed that this looks okay with VC, Young isn't on the call today, I see. But last time I asked him, he was also okay with extracting some sort of spec from virtual client and then making, like if we enhance this spec, making virtual client back to being compliant with the enhanced extracted spec. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, cool. Good to know and looking forward to that. If you have something available at some point, I think I can add it to the meeting notes here for other people to look at external if you want a review from external.
Yep, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you. I will share a quick update. I had a call with Arun. We're trying to make the OSFCI setup work for automation from GitHub. So essentially, we want to run diags on the hardware that HP is nice to provide in the OSFCI format. And we have some progress on it, but maybe we need to go a bit further. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Arun.
Oh, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Satish, any updates on your part of the implementation for the outputs in PCI LMT?
Not on the output side, Adrian, but yeah, we did start roll out LMT across the fleet, and we did see some issues, and I'm going through the bug fix phase right now. So once we have those bugs fixed, and then the output parsing is kind of second stage at this point. So we started seeing a lot of instability issues as soon as we started running LMT. So we are fixing those instabilities right now.
I see. So it decreased the priority for the output.
Correct. So currently we are trying to get the tool rollout first across the fleet. Now that we have a lot of Gen 4, Gen 5 host in the fleet.
Okay, got it. And a similar question for you, Hua. I know you have a different code base for your version of the LMT tool. Do you have any update on how we'll be using that or some sort of integration? What do you think?
I'm thinking because why develop tool, there's a lot of design choice went into it, and you can see many different ways to implement the LMT. Like for example, the Satish's way of using it is totally very different, somewhat different from mine. So okay, I'm thinking I want to open up the flexibility for various diags doing, this LMT. But what if we just do our own output, according to the format, OCP format, without a standard? or in other words, what do we gain by standardizing an output format? I think.
So your question is, why would you use the OCP TV output format? Did I understand that correctly?
No. We'll do the OCP output format, but what if say Satish and we go our separate ways? I'm just you know going back to square one and say, why are we doing this standardization? Who benefit from it?
So I know you have a reply for this, Satish, but let me try to answer this first. So in our discussions and in the calls, we have identified that there's actually two different use cases that we want to address with the LMT, right? And in the last discussion, it was like maybe because these two different use cases will provide different types of outputs, even compliant to the OCP spec, they will structure measurements in a different way, like the hierarchy is different. So in the last discussion, I think we were talking about how to add a flag to the diag so that you select one of these two cases. Based on what you are saying right now, Hua, it sounds to me like you would like to keep these two cases separate in two different diags, because one came from you and one came from Satish, and you are seeing the same hardware in slightly different ways, right?
Well, what I'm saying is that there could be more than two. Like we now have two because there's Satish and I, right? But there could be other different ways. What I'm trying to say is, what are we trying to achieve with standardizing the output format? I think.
Yeah, let me try to. So I agree with you, Hua, that as long as it's just you, like Google and Meta, then yeah, we don't need to standardize. But there is another user coming in and say they want to pick and choose which one they want to use, and then they would like to try both without changing their wrappers and their runners. But that's when the problem complicates. Like now we have two underlying diags, but they have to implement two different wrappers to digest the output. So I think that's what we are trying to solve in the beginning. Like if it's just you and me or Google and Meta, then yeah, I agree. We shouldn't be looking at standardization, but only when like Intel or HP or IBM comes in, they would like to try, and they don't want to change their way of running OCP diags. They already have some sort of runners for OCP diags. They just want to change the diags underneath. Go ahead, Dan.
There's already a third party which Francesco found. I don't remember the company off the top of my head right now, and they're not involved in the discussion. Oxide, yeah. So Oxide have an LMT tool as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, yeah, I think standardization is still benefit for the greater good, but I think for making progress, I think as like I mentioned last time, I think we would like to go ahead and make those changes and see how far we are from each other, and then see if there is a way to convert. Because currently we're just talking about like I still feel like we are not close to standardization yet. We are still having like basic flows established. I think once we have the actual output, and then we can converge one more time and see how far are we, and then we can converge one more time, because I can see a lot of changes coming in as and when we change the code, and then I realize, oh, this output format, whatever we standardize, may not be the right thing for manufacturing. It might be good for DC workflows, but not for manufacturing. And bench workflows are slightly different. So these workflows need different output formats. So these are still emerging on my side. So that's why I thought, okay, maybe we'll go ahead and do the implementation and see what are changes we need to do, if that makes sense.
So when you say, go ahead.
Yeah, because I'm thinking now I have a little bit better understanding of how you run the tool, how you get the outputs. It's at the output level, it's still very different between the way you run it. and my way of running it.
Yeah.
So it's for if we want to have one wrapper consumer of the output, the consumer have to adapt to do two different things. Okay, so so it's not actually simplify the wrapper, but actually complicate the wrapper because they have to do two different things. So so but I'm just thinking about is there really a benefit of
So-
what we're doing right now?
So Hua, the only concern I'm having in all of this discussion is to avoid ambiguity for the users. Because if you know, as an external user, let's say I want to go to this database of diags that we have discussed in a couple of meetings, and I'm looking for a PCI LMP diag, and I see two of them, and I'm like, okay, which one of these would I actually pick? So I don't think it's necessarily undesirable to have different diags here, especially if they have like different use cases. Like one is for manufacturing, one is for fleet health, or whatever different targets. But it needs to be in such a way that it is not ambiguous at the end of the day. Oh, and I'll add one more thing for the thing that the idea that you just said with the consumer of the output would need to like understand both of the types of the outputs. I'm not going to call it format because the format is the OCP TV format. But the structuring would be different in terms of the steps, the measurements, and all of that. So this doesn't change between the two cases, whether we have one diag with selectable use cases or we have two different diags. In both cases, we have two different structurings of the output.
Okay, yeah, I'm just I don't want to take too much time on this topic, but I just want to reevaluate the problem we're trying to solve. Yeah.
Okay. How would you like to continue this discussion? We can do an email, we can do a different call, GitHub discussion. Sounds to me like we should continue to figure this out.
Sure. It'd be helpful, I think, to bring in a third-party user because right now we are our own consumer in our two cases, right? So it'd be helpful to have some third party who's not a tool developer, but a real consumer of this tool to kind of, guide us on what they're looking for.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that both tools are for different use cases. So in theory, someone in Meta may want to use the use case that Google have created, and someone in Google may want to use the use case that Meta have created. So you know, it's probably not that hard to find a user from each of those scenarios and ask them to contribute to a discussion if that's what you were looking for. And rather than it being per tool that the standard is, it's if there is a delta between the use cases that it's documented as a delta in use case output rather than in tooling output. Just, that we still provide standardization even if one of the tools has to have a delta from the other one. It's at a standard because these are the use cases that the delta is for.
So very quickly for the benefit of the discussion here, Satish, could you explain briefly what the two use cases are?
Sure. I think on our side, we are mainly looking for two major use cases. One is the DC, which is kind of a health monitoring use case, which runs in the background and continuously gather margin information. And the other use case is manufacturing. As part of the ODM workflows, we are planning to ingest this tool as part of screening. These are two use cases we have. And the tool we have addresses this two use cases by the same workflow. Like, we don't differentiate these two. One is like a health monitoring, which just collects data. The other one is kind of a pass-fail criteria for manufacturing. But the execution workflow is exactly the same for both.
So what I'm asking is the use cases that we discussed on GitHub, because like I don't remember all of the details right now.
Yeah.
The thing is, one was
The spot.
varying the dimensions of the eye diagram, and the other one was checking for a pass-fail criteria, which is the one that you discussed, right?
Right, exactly. So both, like the scan and the spot check. The scan, which performs the margin across all the steps, and spot check, which is we know what steps we need margin at, so we just look at only those two. So mine is like the spot check at this point. Although the tool supports scan, but our major use case is the spot checks, where we can pick and choose what step, and we say pass or fail on that particular steps.
All right. So I guess the question is at this point whether we should have these two use cases in different diagnostic packages, because you're interested in spot checking, right, for health and manufacturing tolerance or acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
And Hua is interested in more in scanning for capability, right?
Let's confirm that. Well, can you confirm?
Yeah, this is a question for Hua.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have those similar use case too. But my tool as a standalone tool is a bench qualification characterization tool also, but that's outside the scope of the OCP output. But yes, yeah, it has the same capability and purpose. And I think the disconnect may be that from what PCI 6 spec standardization to our testing use case, there can be a different translation mapping. So it really depends on, the say in this case, the smart checker, what it's looking for. So if I think the standardization may be better coming from the user side, the consumer side, rather than the direct side. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right. Sounds to me like this is going in a bit deep. So I'm gonna go back to my question on where do we continue this discussion?
My opinion, I prefer to have like the sample output like from the tool, and instead of coming up with some imaginary outputs, I would prefer to just do a quick mock-up of what we have and create a sample output. This is how it looks like for spot check and scan, and then we share it in the GitHub discussion. And then if Hua can do the same thing, then we can look at the actual output, and then we can see what exactly is different between those two.
All right, that makes sense to me. Does that work for you, Hua?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can do that.
All right, so then we'll defer this until we have the sample output, a real output.
Exactly.
Hua, do you think you could do the same thing from your diag if it's not too much work? I'm asking.
Yeah, I had a previous version done, but then we had more discussion and changes. I can update those. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, what I'm thinking is if we have both of the outputs, then we would be able to make better decisions.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks, both of you. Back to the updates. Vincent, do you have anything you want to share from a Fava manufacturing standpoint, talking to vendors, all of that?
Hey, yeah, let me chime in on that, but I do want to have a quick question on the previous discussion before we put it behind. I just wanted to be clear on whether we were talking about aligning on OCP format, output format, or are we talking about running the tool in different modes? Because it's understandable that you may want to run a single utility. I mean, if we take any of the other ones we have, memtester, stress app test, the iPerfs of the world, FIOs, etc., they're extensively parameterizable and can run in many different modes. But they generate output against a specific format. So in the discussion that Hua and Satish had, I kind of heard clearly that there's a need to run different modes, but I was a bit confused as to whether there was an issue with the output format itself. And sorry, I don't have video today, but can that be made clear? Do we have a discussion here on the output format itself, or is it the modality of the utility?
So I'll start answering that, and then I'll ask you, Satish, to confirm or continue. So Satish actually used the term format a couple of times in the answer, but he is not referring to the format of the output as in what it looks like. In all of this discussion, the outputs are conformant to the OCP TV spec. What we're talking about is in structuring of the steps and run and measurements.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, so I think, yeah, the tool already allows out like what mode we need to run based on the different config. But the only thing which we're trying to solve is the standardization across these two tools. Like both the tools are accomplishing the same goal with two different output format. And both are OCP standard or OCP TV standard, just that we need to merge at some point so that the output is the same, whatever the tool, whichever tool we are using.
But Satish, so yeah, I think I understand that subtlety, but is there, when we talk about the use cases, so if there was a -- Satish mode and a -- Hua mode, would we see value in releasing this utility? Even though they achieve very, very similar things. I know I don't want to repeat the conversation. I understand. I'm kind of going back to square one here, but I am trying to understand whether that in itself has value. And if it does, then why wouldn't we explore having one utility that can run in two different modes, given that you and Hua have outlined slightly subtle differences between the execution modes?
I can take that, Satish, if you want.
See, yeah. Please go ahead.
So the thing we're starting from, Vincent, and this wasn't explicitly said in this conversation, is that the two code bases use different languages. And they have different use cases. Like, as I was saying earlier, one is, what you want to expect from the performance of the, repeater or whatever receiver endpoint. And the other one is scanning for the dimensions of the eye diagram signaling, which is more of a benchmarking thing, which is what Hua started on. So there's two factors which are inhibiting this modality thing. One is the language. Well, actually, a single factor. It's just the language, because if we had them both in the same language, you could easily add the argument and say, okay, run in this mode or this other mode.
Okay. Okay, I think.
There's one thing I wonder is, because they're in two different languages, is there anything to stop both of them having their own equal implementation of both use cases? as they mature as tools, because they're two different languages.
We're kind of duplicating work unnecessarily.
Agreed, we shouldn't be, but it in theory could happen.
I mean, there's nothing from actually stopping people going on these paths. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is to figure out a collaboration model between all of these, requirements. But if Satish wants to implement both ways, and if Hua wants to implement both ways, and one is in Python, one is in Go, then that's all fine. It's just that we're going to have a lot of duplicate work.
Okay, yeah, definitely good food for thought. Thanks for the clarifications. I mean, there's a lot more we could build on, because I don't think this is going to be an exception. This is going to be very common, right, across diagnostics that have this kind of utility aspect to them, or health monitoring. So what comes to mind is more of a plugin model where you've got kind of a framework that's kind of an umbrella LMT runtime, and then you've got these different plugins that the community can contribute to depending on what it is that they want to be monitoring for their use case. But yeah, I'm happy to take it back and think about it some more.
So Vincent, this kind of goes a bit into the aggregation spec that Giovanni is thinking of. Because I can also see these two different diags, which may share the name, but are slightly different slightly different, but importantly different in the ways they are used. They could both exist and both be used in an aggregation where you want to gather different types of views over the same hardware. So you could run both of the tools in the same test, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the clarifications. It was helpful to me. So back to the question you had for me, Adrian, and any update on manufacturing. So still nothing very tangible to share here. Paul is in Taiwan this week. And I'll wait to see if he has an update. I've pinged him, haven't heard just yet, but we'll again, this is something that I expect will take a little time, but I'll provide an update as soon as I have one.
Okay, thanks, Vincent. Karen, thanks again for taking notes. We have a couple of things that I know we're following internally. I don't know if you may be able to share an update on those on the behalf of those things, because we don't have the people on the call here. So maybe on the SSD stuff, on the CTAM, if you know anything new.
I don't know if there's anything newsworthy that's worth sharing this week. So I think we leave it until next week.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, so I guess we're done with the status for this week. We have maybe about 15 to 20 more minutes if anyone wants to raise something for discussion right now, if it's relevant to the whole group. Otherwise, we can end the call earlier. Go ahead, Vincent.
Hey, Adrian, I was thinking the discussion we had a bit internally regarding Daniel's question on standard out, standard error. worth doing a quick 3-minute maybe recap with the group here so that we get any pulse if anybody has feedback. I think we're on the same page, but I thought it would be worth maybe resurfacing with the group here.
Yeah, I can make a summary of that. So the question was, what exactly does a client consume in terms of running a diag? This isn't mandated in the spec because the spec is just about the format of the output. But I think this is an item for the diag writer guidelines document, which we don't have yet, but I have an action to start that and gather some ideas from all of these discussions. So what I was thinking there is if we have a guideline in that the diag packages are executable and you run them as a spawned process on Linux systems or on Windows, then the output by default in the format of OCP TV would be on standard out, on stood out. And anything else which is related to errors or whatever, as the name says, on standard error, right? So that would be the general guidance. Although I also see how different diags would want to toggle this to a different thing for, like, example, a file or a socket or whatever on the disk. So you could have a flag and say, instead of stood out, drop it into this file that something else is observing, or even just writing to the file, not necessarily streaming. So I guess that's kind of the summary of the question and discussion. Are there any opinions on this? Does anyone see another way of providing this interaction between executors and diags? Go ahead, Igor.
So this forwarding thing, shouldn't it be done on the client side? It's like you print the OCP TV format to the STD out, and then as a user of this diag, you can do whatever you want with it on the outer level. Like, do we really need to encode this in the diag? Do we need to provide a special mode to toggle this? So what if we just let the user decide what to do with STD out?
Not sure I understand your question, though.
It's like when you run a program, an executable in Linux, you can forward its output in a file, right? So that the program itself does not need to do that.
Okay, now I get it. So your question is, why would we have a flag where you specify the streaming output location?
Right. OS allows you to decide what to do.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a guideline. It's not mandatory. Like, if you want to have your diag always output on stood out, then you can do that. If you want to add a flag to say, okay, I will say dash output dash, which generally means stood out, right? Or dash output and then a file name, then that's also acceptable. An example I had from Daniel, who Vincent mentioned, was that maybe someone has an interactive diag for whatever reason. So if you output the OCP TV spec on stood out, then that would mangle the interactive UI for said executable, right?
Oh, I see. What if we do it on the library level? Say it's not the diag who decides where to stream, but the library, so that this flag is processed not by the user's code, diag's writer's code, but by the library, basically OCP TV format library. That way, every diag that uses the library can be configured.
Okay. So on that, the Python API has configuration similar to Python logging, for example. And you are able to set in that global configuration the output channel. By default, it's stood out, but you can change it. But it does not parse arguments for you. Now, I don't necessarily think what you're saying is a bad idea, but I think it's a bit intrusive from the library, because the output library is supposed to be to help you output this JSON compliant to the spec without actually having to populate the JSON fields yourself. But it is not a framework in that you have this box of binary framework, and you only put in some functionality, and the args and outputs and everything else is handled for you.
That makes sense. I see.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Igor. Any other inputs on this topic? Yes, Vincent?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adrian, for resurfacing it. If anything, we've got notes of this and brought it up. I do think there may need to be, I mean, in this guidance, maybe some more discussion around how to handle standard error. And I can think probably of a few cases where if, for example, the launch of the DIAG itself barfs on execution, how we may want to handle not corner cases, but unexpected cases that are going to be failures that may be emitting to standard error, and how that fits in the because I think in the DIAG format we had consideration for failure to launch or something like that. I think there was some consideration put, right?
Yeah, it is. The first failure that you can have is in the duty discovery. So the discussion was, how do you output an error when you haven't even started your run?
Right. Yeah,
So, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I remember, and I'm thinking in some of the situations that Daniel and I were talking about, and that I can think of is, if the guidance is, standard error will not be merged to standard out, or should it be merged, whether we should provide that guidance, and maybe some other considerations around things like not log rotation, but output rotation, to fragment files that may be generating very large output. I mean, this is all secondary to the DIAG. I'm not trying to put them all together, but I think there are some valuable direction for the community in terms of how to handle output of the diagnostic and stream that back to the executive.
So I want to address one of the things that you said, with and the rest. I have a different comment for the rest. So you said whether stood out should be merged with stood there. Why exactly do you say that? Where would they be merged? In what case?
Well, if I'm writing a DIAG from scratch, and I would want to know what to do with standard error. Like, do I use it for my own reporting of something that is not meant to be DIAG related, or is there value in having that passed somehow back to the executive for information?
Okay.
At this point, I don't know what I would do with it, right? If I'm writing the DIAG, a completely new DIAG, what would I throw at standard error? The typical practice is pretty clear in application development, right? You just know you put all your errors and failures, unexpected conditions in standard error. But in this case, we're saying we put everything to standard out.
It depends, and not really. You don't put everything to stood out. On stood out in this case, you would only have the JSON L output, because if you put in anything else, then you start mangling the OCP TV output, which becomes unparsable, right? So
Right.
when you say, okay, on stood out, I'm going to have this and only this, not text user UI, not errors, not anything else. I think this goes into my second comment, which is this guidelines document. It should be worth its name, as in guidelines. I don't see the need to be opinionated around all of these items of how you structure your outputs, what you put on there, whatever. Because at the end of the day, we don't have to. So if we don't have to mandate anything in this kind of behavior, then we shouldn't. But I think more importantly, that guidelines document should have the goal of making writing a diag easier, right? So if I see myself as a new person coming into this and say I have to write a diag, same as you were saying, like I don't know exactly what to put on there. The guidance document will say, okay, by default you would probably want to put this on there, right? But you don't have to put it on there. So I think we need to encode like some sane defaults in terms of behavior, but not mandate them.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, and for a little background on initially, there was an internal use case where what Daniel, if he was there, would speak to is that part of this discussion came from aligning on how to pick up the output that was generated from an OCP diag execution done by a different test executive. And so they had to just have a contractual interface on the name of the file. But again, agreed, this is not related to the diag format in any way, and we're not mandating that. But I think it's valuable for this group to be to be considerate about the fact that, yeah, these are runtime common questions that are going to come up. Because, you know, we are purposely staying out of that business, but it is going to be an execution integration question that people will have.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thanks, Adrian.
Okay. No worries. Thanks for the discussion, Vincent and everyone. So I guess we have 5 more minutes, give or take. Some people have dropped off to other meetings, so maybe we can close for today. I'm gonna thank everyone for joining, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.